So Moore's law, what is it? Moore's law is the observation that the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years. Now to analyze this further, I want to look at the first commercial computer with a moving head hard disk drive. So as you can see, it's about the size of 3 industrial fridges. It's huge. And you can see there a person working on it, and also you can see a person pointing to what is the hard disk drive. This is the interesting part. So just some stats about this. It weighs over 1 ton. And keep in mind this was a long time back. And it costs $33,300 per month to rent one of these things. So finance companies and so on who wanted computers would resort to this. Let's take a closer look at the hard disk drive portion, which is this right here. It's being loaded off a plane. That's how big those hard disk drives used to be. And surprisingly, it could only store 5 megabytes of data. That's very less compared to what we have today. Speaking of today, let's look at some of the technology that's available today, or at least recently it was released. The 1 terabyte hard disk drive. This is what that looks like. You've probably seen that. You'll find these in your laptops and so on. The first one of this was released in 2007, and the credit for that goes to Hitachi. And as you can see, it's much smaller than what they used to be. Right here you can see on the box when they released it, it was considered a huge capacity, but right now you can find 1 terabyte of storage in your iPhones. So there's been quite a bit of evolution. 1 terabyte is equivalent to 1 million megabytes. So if you remember, the first computer with a hard disk drive only had 5 megabytes. In 51 years, they managed to pretty much times 1,000. They have much more storage. Also, they managed to decrease the price. What used to be $33,300, you couldn't buy that separately. You had to buy that with the computer. Now, you can buy it separately. When it was released in 2007, it was $399, and adjusted for inflation, that's $609. And the dimensions, as I said, it was small. It's measured in centimeters, not in meters. And the beauty about it is, beauty about Moore's law, just in 2 years, they managed to double the amount of storage that's in a hard drive. That credit goes to Western Digital. By double, I mean literally now it's 2 million megabytes. And with that increase in storage, you probably expect the price to go up, right? Well, no. It decreased by 100. And that's the value adjusted for inflation. While the dimensions remain the same, there's a little bit of increase in depth as well. And these, as I've mentioned here, fit in the 3.5-inch drive form factor. So in 15-inch laptops, 14-inch, and along with this decrease in size, the power efficiency has also increased. Now I want to look at SSDs. This is what people would consider as the future or the successor to HDDs. And SSD stands for solid state drive. So they don't have moving parts like hard disk drives do. So essentially hard disk drives had magnetic drives like disks that spun. And they were generally unreliable and also somewhat power consuming, like it took quite a bit of power to run it. And if you did bring a magnet close to your laptop, you could essentially kill your whole laptop. So with the introduction of SSDs, we've seen much more reliable, much more power efficient computers. So SSDs have something called transistors, like it was mentioned in Moore's law. This is what a common transistor looks like. It has 3 pins, and you'd probably find this on a breadboard circuit. And specifically, they have things called floating gate transistors that are the building blocks of NAND flash memory, and they are what you would call non-volatile memory. And non-volatile memory means even if you pull the power plug, it will continue to store data. Something that is volatile would be, let's say, RAM, which you would also find in your phones and your laptops. If you do pull the power plug, then you'd lose all your data. So, yeah. And I want to take a look at a common example of an SSD. You'd find this in your MacBook, your phone, the 512 gig SSD. If any of you visited the Apple website, for instance, you'd probably see the option 512 gigabytes when you're buying a new MacBook. So this is that written in megabytes. If you recall, the first moving head hard disk drive had 5 megabytes. Now they have 512 in an SSD. Now, if you recall, the HDD was also quite big that I showed earlier. Now the SSD, they've managed to shrink it so much that you could put it next to a 2-taka coin. That's how small it is. So in your MacBook, this is pretty much what it looks like. It's very small. And just for kicks, I put it under my 13-inch laptop as well. You can kind of gauge the size. And here that is next to the image with the plane of the first hard disk drive. So as you can see, they've increased the capacity that you can fit inside a given area, and they've also decreased the size of that, the chip, and also power efficiency is increased, among other things. And also the price. So yeah, you can see here, $35 for an SSD, and another option is the 4,500 taka one. So the one on your right, what you see is this is kind of a replacement for the HDDs that I showed earlier. So if people want a faster computer experience, they would generally buy these and replace it. So people are also moving towards that. Now, restating Moore's law, I want to talk about CPUs. So to further understand Moore's law, let's look at the trend of CPUs as well over the time, the evolution of it. So CPUs also contain transistors. And here's a picture of what those transistors look like. I don't know if it's that clear, but yeah, they're very small. And you need a microscope to see this, an electron microscope. And the scale, if I move my head, is 20 micrometers. It's tiny. So they had to fit transistors that were initially like this big with 3 prongs into that small space there. And you had to use a microscope to see it. Now, let's take a look at one of the commercial examples. One of the first CPUs that were released, the Intel 4004. That you could fit 2,300 transistors in a space of 12 millimeters. And just a few years later, more than a few, you have the Apple M3, one of the latest chips by Apple that's been released. So you'd find this, let's say you bought a new MacBook Pro or a new iMac or something. You'd find this in your computer. So this thing has 25 billion transistors. It went from 2,300 to 25 billion in a matter of years. It's a big improvement, and it's about the same size. It's not that big. Now, this process, this keyword here, it's kind of a marketing term, but let's just keep that in mind. Let's assume that 10 micrometers is the size of a transistor and in this CPU, and 3 nanometers is the size of a transistor in the Apple CPU. So if you look at the conversion of micrometers to nanometers, 10 nanometers, that's the size of a transistor in that Intel chip, is equivalent to 10,000 nanometers. And a transistor from the Apple M3 chip is equivalent, the size is equivalent to 0.03 micrometers. So that's a 1,000% smaller size in just a matter of years. They've managed to shrink the transistor that much. And also, with this decrease in size, increase in power efficiency, and other things, they've also increased the speed. So here are 2 examples of things that have CPUs. The one here is the Apollo rocket guidance computer. So this was placed in Apollo moon rockets that went to the moon, and they were used to kind of calculate the angle and so on that the rocket had to ascend at, and many other calculations. And this over here, called the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, is what you have in your phone, most of you. If you have an Android phone, one of the latest processors that's been released is this one. And as you can see, the speeds, 0.043 megahertz here and 3,300 megahertz here. That's a huge increase. So think about it for a second. Your phone processor is faster than a rocket computer. What do people do with it? Play games. But that's besides the point. You can use it for a lot of things, photography, and along with this increase in speed, people have started using their phones for more photography, video editing, among other things. And you can do a lot more things with this increase in speed and power efficiency as well. But nothing lasts forever. So Moore himself stated as well that his law is becoming invalid slowly. I'm going to give you a hint as to why. You can see here the silicon atom. Essentially, transistors are built up of things called Transistors are built up of silicon atoms, and the size of a silicon atom is 0.2 nanometers. And if you recall, the size of a transistor in the M3 chip is 3 nanometers. So are you seeing the problem here? It's becoming so small that you're reaching the size of a silicon atom. So then that's a problem. You can't keep shrinking it. So what's the solution? I believe it's quantum computing. So up until now, it's really been a breakthrough thanks to Moore's law, and it has resulted in many, many advancements in technology. But with the continuous, as you continue to make the transistor smaller, there's problems that arise, such as leakage current. And what quantum computing does is it takes those problems and uses it to its advantage. So you can continue to produce breakthroughs, especially in the field of AI, as the processing power required increases. You can use this to continue those advancements and those breakthroughs. Thank you very much for listening.